It was supposed to be a simple journey. The sun was shining brightly that morning, and the sky looked calm, painted with soft white clouds drifting lazily. Families carried their bags and chatted cheerfully as they made their way through the small airport. Children laughed, parents held their hands, and the whole place buzzed with the kind of excitement that always comes before a flight. For many, flying was just another part of their routine. For others, it was still a small adventure. Among the travelers that day was a man named Daniel and his 8-year-old daughter, Emily. It was not Emily's first time on a plane, but she always found it magical. She pressed her nose against the window as they walked down the boarding bridge, her small backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She asked her father questions with the curiosity only a child could have. "Daddy, how high does the plane go? Can we see the whole world from up there? Do the clouds feel soft if you touch them?" Her father smiled patiently, answering each one with warmth. 15,000 feet, maybe more, he said, holding her hand firmly. "And no, clouds aren't soft like pillows, even though they look that way. They're just water floating in the sky." Emily giggled at the thought. To her, the sky was a wonderland, and flying felt like stepping into a dream. Inside the aircraft, passengers settled into their seats. Some were business travelers busy with their phones and laptops, others were families chatting, and a few were older couples holding hands quietly, happy to be together on another journey. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, smiling, helping people with bags, and reminding everyone to buckle their seat belts. The air smelled faintly of coffee as one attendant prepared drinks for later. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, calm and steady. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We are ready for takeoff. Our flight should be smooth, and we'll be cruising at about 15,000 feet. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey." The engines roared, and the plane began to move. Emily's eyes widened with excitement as the ground rushed past them, and then, with a powerful lift, they were in the sky. The city below shrank into tiny blocks, cars turned into dots, and the world seemed like a toy set. She clapped her hands softly, whispering, "We're flying, Daddy." Her father squeezed her hand, feeling both her joy and the reassuring calm of the steady plane. For the first hour, everything was perfect. The passengers enjoyed snacks, flipped through magazines, and dozed off in their seats. Emily played a little game on her father's phone, occasionally looking out the window at the ocean of clouds below them. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, like the calm before a storm no one saw coming. Then it happened. Without warning, the plane jolted violently, shaking as though an invisible hand had grabbed it. Drinks spilled, bags shifted overhead, and frightened gasps filled the cabin. Emily grabbed her father's arm tightly, her small fingers digging into his sleeve. "Daddy, what's happening?" she cried, her voice trembling. Daniel's own heart raced, but he forced a calm smile for her sake. "It's just turbulence, sweetheart. It happens sometimes. The plane is strong. Don't worry." But inside, he wasn't so sure. The plane shook again, harder this time. Oxygen masks suddenly dropped from above, dangling in front of the passengers. The flight attendants tried to remain composed, but their stiff expressions gave away their fear. Mothers pressed masks onto their children's faces, fathers tightened straps, and prayers could be heard whispered under the noise of the engines. In the cockpit, chaos had erupted. The pilot and co-pilot worked frantically, their hands moving across controls that no longer responded. Warning lights blinked red on every panel. The steering felt loose, powerless, as though the entire aircraft had become nothing more than a drifting metal bird in the sky. Communication with ground control had cut off, leaving only static on the radio. The more they tried, the more hopeless it seemed. Back in the cabin, the pilot's voice finally returned to the speaker, but this time it carried a weight that made every heart sink. His tone was no longer calm, it was heavy, almost broken. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a critical systems failure. We are doing everything we can. Please remain calm. But how could anyone remain calm when their lives hung in the balance? Passengers began to panic. Some cried openly, others clutched their loved ones as if holding tighter could keep them safe. An elderly woman whispered a prayer over and over, tears streaming down her face. A young man tried to comfort his fiancée, even though his own eyes betrayed his fear. Emily sat frozen in her seat, her mask secured, her wide eyes locked on her father. "Daddy, are we going to fall?" she whispered. Daniel couldn't bring himself to lie this time. His voice cracked as he hugged her close. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I'm here. I won't leave you." The plane continued to shake, dipping slightly as if the air itself was pulling it down. The horizon outside tilted, and the once bright clouds now looked menacing, wrapping around the aircraft like an endless, cold ocean. Every second felt stretched, every sound louder, every heartbeat faster. The pilot and co-pilot exchanged a look of despair. They had tried every maneuver, every backup system, but nothing worked. Sweat rolled down their foreheads as their hands trembled on the useless controls. Finally, the captain leaned back in his seat, defeated, his eyes staring blankly ahead. He whispered to the co-pilot, "It's over. We've lost her." That quiet sentence, though not spoken to the passengers, seemed to echo through the air, as if the very plane had heard it. But among all the chaos, Emily noticed something others didn't. From where she sat near the front of the cabin, her curious eyes caught sight of a small, dusty lever near the cockpit door. It was different, something she hadn't seen before. To most, it was just another part of the plane's complicated controls, but to her, it stood out, almost like a puzzle waiting for someone to solve. While others cried, Emily's young mind kept turning. She remembered a story her grandfather once told her about flying small gliders and how sometimes, when machines failed, there were still ways to control them manually. She thought of the flight game she loved to play on her tablet, where pulling one way or another could change the direction of the plane. Her father noticed her staring. "Emily, what are you looking at?" he asked, confused by her sudden focus. "The handle," she whispered softly, almost to herself. "That one near the door. I think it's important." Daniel frowned, unsure of what she meant, but he didn't push her further. In that terrifying moment, he could only hold her and hope. No one knew then that this small detail, seen through the eyes of an 8-year-old girl, would soon become the key to something that everyone else, including the captain, believed was impossible. The plane continued to drift at 15,000 feet, helpless and out of control. Passengers sat in silence now, their tears mixing with prayers, their hands clenched together. The world outside was vast and merciless, and inside, fear hung as heavy as the oxygen mask swinging above. And yet, in the middle of all that fear, a little girl's eyes stayed fixed on that forgotten lever. She didn't understand everything, but something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance. The air inside the plane grew heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath at the same time. The soft sound of crying mixed with the low hum of the engines, which now sounded more like a growl than the comforting roar they once were. Some passengers clutched their seats tightly, their knuckles turning white, while others buried their faces in their hands, unable to look out the windows at the endless sky. Daniel tried to keep Emily calm, stroking her hair gently, whispering that everything would be all right, but his own voice shook with every word. Emily leaned against him, her mask covering half her face, her wide eyes fixed on the cockpit door. She could hear faint voices from inside, urgent, frustrated, almost hopeless. The captain's voice came once again over the speakers, but this time it lacked the confidence passengers expect from the person in control. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are still experiencing critical difficulties. I ask you to remain seated and keep your masks on. We, we will continue trying. His pause was long, and in that silence, the passengers felt the unspoken truth. Even the man flying the plane was afraid. The co-pilot's voice was heard faintly through the half-open door. Nothing is responding. The system's locked. It's like we're gliding with no wings. The captain let out a sound that wasn't quite words, more like a sigh that carried both exhaustion and defeat. Emily heard it. She wasn't supposed to, but her sharp ears caught every broken tone, every fragment of despair. A strange feeling filled her chest, something she had never experienced before. She was just a little girl, and yet, at that moment, she sensed the adults had no answers left. The plane lurched again, tilting slightly before leveling itself. Gasps filled the cabin. A baby wailed loudly, and its mother hugged it close, tears rolling down her cheeks. A young man tried to calm his fiancée by whispering softly, though his hands trembled as he held hers. An older man, perhaps in his 70s, closed his eyes and whispered a prayer with every breath. The flight attendants did their best to comfort passengers, but their own fear was visible in their eyes. Their smiles were gone, their voices shaky as they walked down the aisle, telling people to stay calm, reminding them to keep their masks on. One attendant bent down to reassure a child, but her hands were trembling so much she could barely keep them steady. Inside the cockpit, the captain leaned back in his seat, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He had been a pilot for decades. He had flown through storms, dealt with technical failures, and guided hundreds of flights safely across the skies. But never had he felt this powerless. Every control he touched was dead, every light that blinked red reminded him that the machine no longer listened. The co-pilot tried again, flipping switches, checking instruments, his voice rising with frustration. It's useless. Nothing's working. We've lost everything. The captain closed his eyes for a moment, then whispered words he never thought would leave his mouth. It's over. We've lost control. There's nothing more we can do. Though he said it quietly, those words carried the weight of finality. The co-pilot sat frozen, his hands dropping from the controls, staring at the blinking alarms that filled the cabin with their cold red glow. Back in the passenger cabin, fear reached its peak. People began speaking openly about their goodbyes. Some recorded short messages on their phones, their voices breaking as they spoke to loved ones they might never see again. A mother kissed the forehead of her son, telling him she loved him no matter what happened. A businessman wiped tears from his eyes, trying to keep his composure while sending a final text. Emily watched all of this silently. She was only 8, but her heart felt heavier than ever before. She pressed her face into her father's chest, but her eyes kept drifting back toward the cockpit door, toward that mysterious lever she had noticed earlier. Something inside her told her it mattered. Daniel noticed her gaze and touched her cheek gently. Don't look there, sweetheart. The pilots will take care of it. His voice was filled with more hope than belief. But Emily whispered softly, Daddy, what if they can't? Those words pierced him deeper than the plane's shaking ever could. He didn't answer. He didn't know how to. He only hugged her tighter, wishing he could shield her from the reality unfolding around them. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour. The plane drifted, powerless, as though suspended in the sky by nothing but fate. The passengers had gone quiet now, their earlier cries replaced with a strange, heavy silence. Only the occasional sob broke the stillness. It was the silence of people waiting for an end they could not stop. The captain remained slumped in his seat, his hands no longer moving over the controls. For the first time in his career, he had given up. His eyes stared blankly ahead, not at the instruments, not at the sky, but at nothing at all. Emily shifted in her seat, unable to ignore the pull inside her. She kept thinking about her grandfather's stories, how he once told her that when machines failed, sometimes you had to rely on the simplest things, the backup ways, the things no one expected. She remembered him showing her how a glider worked, how pulling or pushing at just the right time could keep it steady. She remembered the game she loved on her tablet, where she practiced flying through rings and landing safely. To most, it was just a game. To her, it was a small world she understood. Her eyes landed once more on that lever. It called to her in a way she couldn't explain. She tugged at her father's sleeve gently. "Daddy, can I go look? Please." Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, Emily. Stay here. It's not safe." "But what if I can help?" she whispered, her voice barely audible under the hiss of the oxygen masks and the hum of the engines. Her father looked at her with tired eyes. He wanted to tell her that children couldn't help in situations like this, that it wasn't her responsibility, that she was too young. But something about her determination, the way her small face was so serious, made him pause. He shook his head again, though softer this time. "You don't understand, sweetheart. Even the pilots can't fix it. There's nothing anyone can do." Emily didn't argue further, but she didn't look away from the cockpit door either. Inside, she could almost feel the weight of the hopeless pilots. She could almost hear the silence of their despair. And still, that lever kept pulling at her thoughts. The plane drifted onward, trapped at 15,000 feet, the horizon stretching endlessly outside. Passengers held each other close, whispering their last words. The crew could only repeat hollow reassurances, their voices thin with fear. And in the cockpit, 2 trained men had already surrendered to fate. But in the middle of all that despair, an 8-year-old girl sat quietly, her eyes burning with something no one else had hope. She didn't know how, she didn't know why, but a voice inside her whispered that maybe it wasn't over yet. Maybe there was still something left to try. And in that moment, when the captain himself had given up, the seed of the impossible began to grow inside a little girl's heart. The minutes dragged like hours. The plane still floated in the air, caught between life and death, while silence wrapped around the passengers like a heavy blanket. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of fear, the kind that squeezes your chest and makes every breath feel heavier. Emily sat quietly in her seat, her mask still over her face, her little fingers holding onto her father's hand. Daniel tried to stay calm, but his mind was spinning with thoughts he couldn't push away. He had always believed the pilot was the safest person to trust on a flight. But now, even the pilot had given up. He had heard the broken tone in the captain's voice, the hollow words, the whisper that everything was over. And yet, his daughter's eyes still glowed with something different. Not fear, at least not only fear, but something brighter, a spark that refused to die out. She kept looking toward the cockpit, toward that lever, as though she knew something everyone else had missed. The plane jolted suddenly, dropping a few feet in the air. Gasps filled the cabin, and a few people screamed. Emily clutched the armrest, her heart pounding, but instead of sinking back, she sat straighter. It was as if the shake had made her decision for her. She turned to her father and spoke in a voice that was soft but steady. "Daddy, I want to go to the front." Daniel's eyes widened in shock. "No, Emily. You have to stay here. It's too dangerous." Her small face was serious, more serious than he had ever seen. "But the pilots aren't doing anything anymore. They think it's over. Maybe I can try." Daniel shook his head quickly, fear flashing across his face. "You don't understand, sweetheart. This isn't a game. This is real life." But Emily didn't look away. Her eyes stayed locked on his, full of determination. "I know it's real, Daddy. That's why I have to try. If no one else will, then I should." Her words struck him deeply. She was only 8, yet she was speaking with the courage of someone far older. He wanted to protect her, to keep her safe in his arms, but in that moment, he realized something: maybe protecting her also meant letting her try. He looked around the cabin. People were staring at their laps, crying silently, whispering prayers, sending messages they might never deliver. No one was moving, no one was fighting back against fate. And then he looked back at his daughter, the only one who hadn't given up. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "Emily, are you sure?" She nodded firmly, her ponytail bouncing slightly with the motion. "Yes, Daddy. I'm sure." For a moment, he hesitated, torn between fear and hope. Then, slowly, he unbuckled her seat belt. His hands trembled as he helped her stand up. A few passengers nearby looked at them in confusion, some even shaking their heads as if to say, "Don't do it." But Daniel ignored them. Emily's small shoes tapped softly on the floor as she made her way toward the cockpit door. Every step felt heavier, as though the entire weight of the plane rested on her shoulders. Her father followed behind, ready to pull her back if something went wrong. When she reached the door, she hesitated. The voices inside were quiet now, heavy with despair. She knocked softly. The door opened just a little, and the co-pilot's tired eyes looked out. He blinked in surprise when he saw the little girl standing there. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Emily took a small breath and said bravely, "I want to help." The co-pilot frowned. "Sweetheart, this is no place for you. It's too dangerous. Go back to your seat." But the captain, slumped in his chair, overheard her words. He gave a bitter, hopeless laugh. "Let her stay. It doesn't matter anymore." His voice was broken, stripped of all authority. Daniel's heart ached hearing that. The man who was supposed to guide them to safety had lost all hope. Emily stepped inside the cockpit, her eyes immediately scanning the controls. They were covered in blinking red lights, warning sounds echoing through the space. It looked like chaos to anyone else, but her eyes went straight to the lever she had seen earlier. She pointed at it with her small finger. "What about that one? Why aren't you using it?" The co-pilot looked at where she was pointing. He shook his head. "That's just a manual override. It's old, and we don't even know if it works. We didn't bother. It's useless." Emily frowned, her brows furrowing the way they did when she was focused on her games or puzzles. "But did you try it?" The co-pilot opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth was, in their panic, they had overlooked it. They had been so focused on the advanced systems, the technology, the buttons and screens, that the old-fashioned lever seemed unimportant. Emily didn't wait for their answer. She walked closer and wrapped her tiny hands around the handle. Her father gasped softly behind her. "Emily, wait!" But the captain didn't stop her. He just watched with hollow eyes, as if curious about what she thought she could do. Emily pulled the lever down gently. The plane shuddered, dipping forward sharply. Passengers screamed as their stomachs dropped. Daniel grabbed the side of the cockpit door, his heart racing. "Emily!" But the little girl didn't panic. She adjusted her grip, pushing the lever back slightly. The plane responded again, this time jerking upward. Her eyes lit up. "It works," she whispered. The co-pilot leaned forward, his eyes wide. "Wait, she's right. The controls are responding, just a little." The captain sat up straighter for the first time in nearly half an hour. He looked at the lever as though it were something magical. "Impossible," he muttered. "We thought it was dead." Emily's small arms trembled from the effort, but she kept her focus. She remembered her grandfather's stories, her tablet game, the way the controls always required small, careful movements. "Not too much at once," she murmured to herself. She shifted the lever slowly, carefully, and the plane steadied. The screaming in the cabin grew quiet as passengers realized the violent shaking had stopped. They looked at each other, confused, not knowing what had happened. In the cockpit, The co-pilot quickly began monitoring the instruments. It's not much, but we have some control back. She did it? She actually did it? Daniel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as he watched his daughter. Pride and fear tangled in his chest, but above all, he felt awe. Emily turned her head just slightly, looking at the two men. You have to help me. Tell me what to do. For a moment, the captain stared at her, unable to believe what was happening. Then, slowly, as if remembering who he was supposed to be, he leaned forward. His voice was steadier now, not as broken as before. All right, little one. Slow and gentle movements. Keep the nose steady. Don't fight the air, guide it. Emily nodded, her tongue poking out a little in concentration. She gripped the lever with all her strength, moving it carefully as the captain and co-pilot guided her. The plane no longer felt like a lifeless object, it felt alive again, responding to her touch. For the first time since the crisis began, there was a sliver of hope. Back in the cabin, passengers noticed the difference. The plane was still drifting, but it was no longer shaking violently. A few people whispered in confusion. Did the pilots fix it? Are we safe? No one knew the truth that an 8-year-old girl was the one holding the plane steady. Emily's arms began to ache, but she didn't let go. She thought of the faces behind her, all the people crying and praying, all the lives depending on her. She thought of her father, who had trusted her when no one else would. And she thought of her grandfather's words, sometimes, when everything else fails, the simplest way is the only way left. She gritted her teeth and whispered, I can do this. The captain leaned closer, his voice firmer now. Yes, you can. Just keep going, little one. You're not alone, we're with you. And for the first time since the disaster began, the man who had given up found himself believing again. The cockpit, once filled with despair, now seemed alive again. The red lights still blinked, alarms still buzzed, but the mood had shifted. It wasn't over yet. Something was happening, something no one expected. Emily's small hands trembled as she gripped the lever, but her eyes stayed locked on it with focus. Every movement she made seemed to matter. The plane tilted, dipped, or steadied depending on how she touched it. Her breaths came in quick bursts, her chest rising and falling beneath the mask, but she didn't stop. The captain leaned forward in his seat, his voice sharper than before. Slowly, girl. Not too far left there, hold it. The co-pilot glanced between the instruments and the child, disbelief still written across his face. I can't believe this. She's controlling it. She's actually controlling it. Daniel stood just inside the cockpit doorway, his hands shaking as he watched his daughter. Every instinct screamed to pull her away, to take her back to her seat and hold her tight. But something inside him told him not to. Somehow, impossibly, Emily was the only reason the plane hadn't fallen apart already. Back in the cabin, the passengers noticed the difference too. The sharp drops had stopped, and the shaking had calmed into a softer sway. People began lifting their heads, their eyes darting around in confusion. It feels steadier, someone whispered. What happened? Another person muttered, did the pilots fix it? Nobody knew the truth that an 8-year-old girl was holding their fate in her hands. Emily's arms grew tired quickly. The lever was stiff and heavy, and she wasn't strong enough to keep it steady without trembling. Her small fingers slipped once, and the plane lurched downward suddenly, sending a wave of screams through the cabin. She gasped and adjusted quickly, pulling it back. The plane steadied again, but her little body shook from the effort. I can't, it's heavy, she whispered, her voice small. The captain's voice came quickly. You're doing fine. Don't fight it all at once. Just guide it. Gentle, like you're holding a bird in your hands. Those words seemed to help her. She adjusted her grip, easing her movements instead of forcing them. Slowly, the plane responded, smoother this time. Daniel crouched beside her, his hand hovering close as if ready to catch her if she faltered. "You're doing so good, Emily," he whispered, tears forming in his eyes. "I'm right here. You're not alone." The co-pilot leaned over his instruments, watching closely. "Altitude is dropping slowly, but controlled. She's keeping us stable. If we can guide her, maybe we can even aim for a landing site." The captain nodded, his jaw tight. His hopelessness had turned into determination again. "We're not done. Not if she's willing to try." Emily bit her lip, focusing with every ounce of strength. She remembered her game on the tablet, how sudden, big moves always made the plane crash, but gentle ones kept it balanced. She thought of her grandfather's words about gliders, how you don't fight the air, you work with it. She let those memories guide her hands. In the cabin, people began to sense something had changed. The flight attendants whispered among themselves, trying to keep order. Some passengers looked out the windows and noticed the plane no longer dipped violently. The atmosphere was still tense, but tiny sparks of hope flickered. But it wasn't easy. Every few minutes, turbulence shook them again. Emily held tight, her little arms straining, her body tensing as the plane resisted. The lever fought back, heavy and stubborn, but she refused to let go. At one point, the turbulence hit harder, making the plane dip to one side. People screamed, and luggage rattled in the overhead bins. Emily's hand slipped, and her father gasped, ready to grab her. But she shook her head fiercely. "No, Daddy, I can do it." She tightened her grip again, pulling carefully, and the plane leveled. The co-pilot's jaw dropped. How is she doing this? She shouldn't even know what to do. Daniel answered quietly, his voice breaking. She remembers stories her grandfather told her, and games she plays. She just understands it. The captain stared at the girl, his heart heavy but also filled with awe. Sometimes, it takes someone who hasn't been trained to see the simple way through. She's not thinking about rules or procedures. She's just feeling it. Emily kept working, her breaths coming hard, sweat forming on her forehead. Every second felt like a battle. But every second she held on, the plane stayed alive. The co-pilot managed to reconnect a faint signal on the radio. Static filled the cockpit, but then a broken voice came through. "This is Control Tower, we read you faintly, what's your status?" The captain grabbed the radio, his voice firm again. "We've lost full systems control. Manual override engaged. We're at 15,000, descending slowly. Stand by." He hesitated, glancing at Emily before adding, A passenger is currently stabilizing us." There was a long pause on the radio before the voice answered, confused. "Say again? Did you say, a passenger?" The captain didn't explain. He didn't have time. He just turned back to Emily. "All right, little one. We'll need to start thinking about a landing. You'll have to keep her steady until we guide you down." Emily's eyes widened. "I have to land it too." The captain gave her a small nod. "Not alone. We'll tell you exactly what to do. You've already saved us once. You can do this." Her hands trembled again, not just from effort but from fear. But then she looked at her father, who was kneeling beside her with tears in his eyes, and she nodded. "Okay. Tell me what to do." The cabin behind them remained unaware of the full truth, but hope was slowly replacing despair. Parents hugged their children tighter, couples held hands, and strangers comforted each other. They didn't know that a little girl was at the controls, but they could feel that something had shifted, that maybe their prayers were being answered in the most unexpected way. The turbulence grew rougher as the descent continued. Emily's arms ached, her small fingers numb, but she never let go. Every time the plane shook, she adjusted. Every time her strength wavered, she thought of all the people depending on her. She thought of the baby crying in the back, of the old woman whispering prayers, of the father who trusted her with his life. She couldn't give up. The captain's voice stayed calm now, steady, guiding her with clear instructions. Left a little, good. Now hold it. Easy, easy. That's it. The co-pilot monitored the descent. Altitude holding steady. We can try for an emergency strip if we keep this up. Daniel whispered encouragement into her ear. You're so brave, Emily. Just keep going a little longer. Her small voice answered, strained but determined. I'm not going to stop. I promised myself. Minute by minute, the impossible continued. An 8-year-old girl was flying a plane. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but enough to keep them alive. Enough to turn despair into a fragile, flickering hope. As the ground slowly came closer, the co-pilot pointed at the map on his screen. There's a small landing strip within reach. If she can hold steady for another 20 minutes, we might make it. The captain nodded firmly. Then that's what we'll do. He looked at Emily, his eyes softer now. You hear that, little one? 20 more minutes. You've already done the impossible. Now we finish it together. Emily's tired eyes met his. She nodded once, gripping the lever tighter. Her arms hurt, her hands burned, but she refused to let go. And so, against all odds, the plane continued its descent, not because of technology, not because of the captain's skill, but because of the courage of a little girl who refused to give up when everyone else had. The minutes felt endless as the plane glided forward, the engines humming but not guiding, the controls weak but still responding to Emily's touch. Every second was a battle between gravity and determination, between fear and courage. The captain and co-pilot kept their voices steady, giving instructions one by one, while Daniel stayed close to his daughter, whispering encouragement every time her small arms trembled. Outside the window, the endless sky was slowly giving way to land. Patches of green fields and winding roads appeared far below, blurred by the distance but growing clearer with each passing moment. The ground, once so far away, was now becoming a real destination instead of a threat. The radio crackled with voices from the control tower. We see your plane on the radar. You're cleared for an emergency landing. Do you copy? The captain responded firmly, though he glanced at Emily as he spoke. Copy. We're attempting manual landing. Passenger assistance at the controls. Stand by. There was silence on the other end, as if the tower couldn't quite believe what they had just heard. Then the voice returned, softer, almost hesitant. Understood. We'll prepare emergency response on the ground. In the cabin, passengers clung to each other as the announcement came through the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are preparing for an emergency landing. Please remain calm, stay in your seats, and follow crew instructions. His words were calmer now, steadier, and that steadiness gave people a fragile sense of hope. The flight attendants hurried down the aisle, checking seat belts, reminding passengers of the brace position. Fear was still heavy in the air, but the chaos from before had softened. Instead of wild panic, there was a quiet tension, the kind that comes when people realize their lives might depend on the next few minutes. Emily's arms were shaking, her fingers sore from gripping the lever for so long. Sweat rolled down her forehead, and her breathing was fast, but she refused to let go. Every time the plane dipped, she corrected it. Every time it swayed too much, she pulled or pushed carefully. Her entire small body was working harder than it ever had, but her eyes never wavered from the task. The captain guided her in a low, steady voice. All right, little one. We're almost there. Keep it level, that's good. Now, we'll start lowering gently. Don't fight it, just guide it slowly down. The co-pilot pointed out the landing strip in the distance. It was small, barely long enough for a safe landing, but it was their only chance. Emergency vehicles were already gathering at the edges, tiny red and yellow dots waiting with flashing lights. "Do you see it?" the co-pilot asked. Emily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." Her father bent close to her ear, his own voice trembling with emotion. "You're so brave, Emily. You've already saved us. Just a little more." The final approach began. The plane descended, not as smoothly as a normal flight, but enough to keep them on course. The passengers braced themselves, bending forward, gripping the seats in front of them, their hearts pounding like drums. Some prayed aloud, some closed their eyes tightly, and others couldn't stop watching out the window as the ground rushed closer. The runway grew larger in the cockpit window, no longer a distant strip but a real stretch of pavement waiting for them. Emily's arms shook harder now, the weight of the lever almost too much for her. Her small voice broke. "It's too heavy." Daniel placed his hands gently over hers, not to take control, but to steady her. "I'll hold with you. We'll do it together." The captain nodded. "Good. Nice and easy. Hold steady, little one. Don't let it drop too fast. That's it. You've got this." The wheels neared the ground. The plane shook violently as the air currents pushed against it, but Emily held firm, her father's hand steadying her grip. The captain called out calmly, "Almost there, almost, now pull just a little, hold it, hold it." The moment stretched like eternity. And then with a thunderous screech, the wheels touched the runway. The plane bounced once, hard, sending passengers jerking in their seats. Gasps and cries erupted. But Emily held on, adjusting quickly, keeping the nose from dipping too sharply. The plane slammed down again, sparks flying from the tires, but this time it stayed on the ground. The runway roared beneath them, the sound of rubber tearing against asphalt filling every corner of the plane. Emily's arms burned, her shoulders aching, but she didn't let go until the plane slowed, until the screech softened into a rolling rumble. The co-pilot pulled at the emergency brakes, and the plane finally came to a full stop at the far end of the strip. For a long moment, silence filled the air. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. It was as if the entire world had paused to make sure it was real. Then the silence broke, first with sobs, then with cheers. Passengers cried openly, hugging each other, thanking God, thanking fate, thanking whatever miracle had just happened. Some fell to their knees in the aisle, unable to believe they were alive. Daniel wrapped his arms tightly around Emily, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You really did it?" Emily leaned into him, exhausted, her small body trembling from both effort and relief. "We didn't crash, Daddy," she whispered. The captain removed his headset slowly, his hands shaking as he looked at her. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I've flown hundreds of flights, but I've never seen anything like this. You saved us all." The co-pilot nodded, still staring at the little girl in disbelief. "She did the impossible." Outside, emergency crews rushed toward the plane, ready to help. The doors opened, and the fresh air of the runway filled the cabin. Passengers filed out, some kissing the ground, others thanking every crew member they passed. When they saw Emily walking with her father, many stopped, realizing who she was. Word spread quickly through the group, it wasn't the pilots who saved them, it was the little girl. People surrounded her, their voices full of gratitude. Some cried as they thanked her, others simply reached out to touch her shoulder as if to make sure she was real. To them, she wasn't just a child anymore, she was their hero. News spread fast. By the time they reached the airport terminal, cameras and reporters were already waiting, trying to capture the story. Headlines soon filled screens everywhere: 8-year-old girl saves doomed flight. Emily, however, didn't see herself as a hero. When someone asked her how she did it, she simply shrugged and said softly, "I just didn't want everyone to fall. I remembered what my grandpa told me. And I thought about my game." Her innocence touched everyone who heard it. People shook their heads in wonder, amazed that such bravery and calm could come from someone so young. That night, after all the chaos, after the questions and the noise, Emily sat quietly with her father in a small hotel room near the airport. Daniel looked at her with eyes filled with both pride and disbelief. "You saved hundreds of lives today, Emily. Do you understand how big that is?" She leaned against him sleepily, her small voice answering, "I just wanted to help. I didn't want to give up like the pilot did." Daniel hugged her tightly, his heart swelling with pride. "And that's what makes you special. You didn't give up when everyone else did." The world would never forget the story of the flight that lost all control at 15,000 feet, the day the pilot gave up, and the little girl who refused to. And though Emily would grow up and live many more years, that moment in the sky would always remain a reminder that sometimes courage doesn't come from strength, experience, or age. Sometimes, it comes from the pure heart of a child who simply refuses to stop believing in the impossible.